Hello everyone, and welcome to the obscenely delayed 31st episode of Chrontendo. My apologies for getting this thing out so late, but I'm going to delay it just a bit longer with a few important announcements. This episode will feature the fantastic and informative history of adventure games, but because this was so long, a couple things. First of all, it got cut in half. This episode will feature the first half, and also it made the episode itself so long that we're only doing 13 games instead of 15. Well, other than that, we've got the usual stuff on display here today. Wacky adventure games, horrible RPGs, and even a cool action game from Konami. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and proceed. Alright, so what's on the menu today? Well, how about some adventure games and RPGs? First up is one from Nintendo themselves, Famicom Tantei Club, Kieta Koukeisha. Remember back in Chrontendo 22 when we saw that Mukashi Banashi adventure game? It was an FDS game released separately on 2 discs, about a month apart. Well, Famicom Tantei Club is a follow-up to that. Well, I had praised Nintendo for its creativity in giving Mukashi Banashi a Japanese folklore-ish setting, rather than the typical murder mystery plot found in most other adventure games. Well, I guess I have to take it back now, because as of April 1988, Nintendo enters the crowded field of Portopia clones. Well, that kid with the spiky hair, that's you, and you've got, get this, amnesia. Yep, you're a detective with amnesia. Sounds a lot like the MacVenture game Deja Vu, doesn't it? Coincidence? Well, yeah, probably. So, Nintendo introduced some innovations in their earlier adventure games, like switching between 2 characters in Mukashi Banashi, or branching dialogue trees in that Nakayama Miho dating sim game. Now really, as far as I can tell, none of that's on display here. It's the standard Portopia-style gameplay. There's like the usual ask, investigate, change location, call, etc. On the menu options there. Another thing, and we've seen this before, is like the delayed title screen, which appears after a few minutes of gameplay. This seems like it was taken directly out of Hokkaido Renza Satsujin, which was Yuji Hoри's Portopia sequel. And this game even actually has a maze at the end, just like Portopia. Title screen here is pretty nice looking, I guess. Sort of an understated atmospheric illustration. A number of impressive names appear in the credits, namely Gunpei Yokoi and Satoru Okada as producer, and Metroid creator Yoshio Sakamoto as director. All the guys who were, involved in much more interesting stuff than this. And as I mentioned, just like Mukashi Banashi, Disc 1 was released first, and then the second half of the game was released on Disc 2, which came out a bit later on June 14th. Now, one interesting fact, in 2004, Nintendo released a series of early Famicom games for the Game Boy Advance, under the name Famicom Mini. These weren't remakes, they're actually more like direct ports. They looked exactly like the original game. There were the early Mario games, Zelda, Metroid, and so on, up through the 2 Famicom Tantei Club games, this one and its sequel. And these were actually the last Famicom games to get ported to that series. So I guess the classic Nintendo Famicom era sort of officially ends with Famicom Tantei Club. So anyway, Japanese murder mystery games are gradually becoming sort of more text-heavy. Compare this to Portopia and you'll see just how much everyone talks. It's almost like a visual novel. This game involves you investigating the death of the head of a wealthy family. No surprise there, but presumably a good story is the main appeal of this game. It was successful enough to have a couple sequels, but sadly it's not yet been translated into English. This first game here I was actually really looking forward to. Not sure why it was. It was released by Tokyo Shoseki, who don't really have a great track record. They're a textbook company and mostly release educational games. And it looks like the game itself was by these System Soft people. Well anyway, I heard this was a Zelda clone, and we haven't really had too many of those. I was kind of intrigued. A completely unknown Zelda-style game recently translated in English? Sounds interesting. Yeah, well, it turns out I was wrong. I was trying to talk to the guards here, but no go. You can, however, talk to the king, naturally, once you get inside the castle, and he'll give you the whole scoop. Some sort of evil being named Baal. You must stop him. Well, fancy that. But first he wants you to prove yourself by fetching some stuff out of his dungeon. Yet the king just happens to have an enormous dungeon right on the premises, many times larger than his castle itself. So we've got some good old-fashioned dungeon crawling to do. Now at some point it's going to be clear that Elysion isn't really a Zelda clone, it's rather a pre-Dragon Quest style RPG, an action RPG. In fact, it's a port of a Japanese computer RPG. At this point, there's not really anything to do other than head over to the dungeon next door and start poking around. First of all, open up all these conveniently placed chests for some clothes, weapon, and one healing potion. The interface is pretty clumsy. Use the B button to open the menu, and then the A button to make a selection in the menu. Not sure why two different buttons, but that's the way it works. Once you get into the dungeon proper, you'll encounter the usual slimes and skeletons and treasure chests. But this is where Elysion gets weird. Enemies only move when you do. Take a look at the video here. In other words, if you move one step or use your weapon once, the enemy on screen will move one step as well. So it's sort of turn-based movement, I suppose. Very odd, but it seems to make it easier to avoid enemies. Still, you'll always take damage fighting, and your heal spell is very expensive in terms of magic points to use. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering what the name Elysion means, well, it's a reference to the Elysian Fields. That was one of the Greek underworlds. Warriors went to the Elysian Fields when they died. Though this game actually spells it, well, I guess incorrectly. They put an O where the A is supposed to be. Now, as I mentioned, Elysion is a port. We'll take a look at the old computer game from System Stuff. Apparently first published in 1986. The controls are completely different. Here you use function keys to carry out the various commands, but the layout of the game itself is, well, I guess it's actually pretty much exactly the same as the Famicom version. However, note the characters are depicted more realistically in the style of Western RPGs. Pre-Dragon Warrior RPGs obviously had to take their inspiration from Western games, and having super deformed or anime-style characters was not yet in style. I guess it's not really a bad-looking game. Now here I finally find that hero's ring I was looking for. At this point I'm still on level 1. You appear to level up very slowly, but when you equip the ring, you automatically shoot up to level 5. I know, that's pretty strange, huh? It should be pointed out that this dungeon is huge and is 4 floors deep. It's bigger than the final dungeon in games like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, and it's full of monsters that can instantly kill you. It's actually bigger than a lot of the later dungeons in Elysion, and the very first thing you have to do is to go through this dungeon. So Elysion is what we would call, in today's terms, unbalanced. So your object now is to collect these scrolls around the world and a magic sword, though the sword is actually missing some magic jewels. You have to collect those too. It's time to wander around aimlessly. Oh, by the way, we got the famous delayed title screen there. But first of all, you gotta do lots of leveling and getting money and all that sort of thing. Because of the absurdly tough monsters that are walking around, you have to do a lot of leveling before you can really fight them. That seems to be really a sign of an old school RPG. It makes you do all your leveling first, then you can explore. As opposed to, say, Final Fantasy, where you can kill the first boss at level 2, and you can level up as you go along. Quite frankly, after the ring got me level 5, I never even made it to level 6. Apparently it takes about 500 experience points per level, from levels 5 to 11. I actually quit when I had accumulated only an additional 131 experience points, because the monsters don't really give a whole lot of experience. But really, fighting is not fun in this game, and you always lose like a quarter of your health each battle. And you can only use your healing spell twice if your MP is full, so it's really not a very cool game, I'm afraid. But if you like tedious, painful to play action RPGs, then Elysion is your game. I'll point out that this does have a pretty good fan translation courtesy of O Tenshigami. His translation is probably better than the game deserves, so it is approachable at least in terms of language. Tecmo was known for making some pretty good sports games. However, this is one of the more unusual sports games for the NES, Captain Tsubasa. In fact, this is actually like no other sports game we've seen so far, since it's mostly controlled via menus, rather than through normal means. Now, Captain Tsubasa is, as you probably already figured out, a soccer game, or as they call it in many parts of the world, football, or even, God help us, footy. The game is based around a licensed property. Captain Tsubasa is, I hope you're sitting down for this, based on a long-lived manga and anime series about a kid named Tsubasa Ozora, who is naturally gifted at soccer and had these amazing, almost supernatural soccer-playing abilities. It's funny how that's a recurring theme in the manga we've been seeing. A young kid who exhibits heaven-sent talents in a particular field. For example, there was Surikichi Senpai with fishing, and pro golfer Saru with golf. Tecmo did release this game in the West as Tecmo Cup Soccer, a very creative name there. In Europe it was called Tecmo Cup Football. Naturally, all the reference to Tsubasa were removed, and the intro was changed, and all the characters' faces were altered. Tsubasa in particular became some sort of preppy douchebag named Robin Field. Everyone seems to be depicted as some sort of blonde, blue-eyed Aryan type. I guess the localization team was confusing the US with Sweden or something like that. Coach in particular got a really ugly makeover. Additionally, a few elements were removed. There's actually a side quest later on in the game that's not in the Western version. Now, like I said, this is not a traditional sports game. It actually almost sort of veers into RPG territory, as your actions are selected in the menu, and then you watch them play out. When you have the ball, you can run down the field using the D-pad. To issue a command, you hit the B button, and then you have options to pass, shoot, or return to dribbling. I'm looking at my pass options here. No one was very good, so I just continued to dribble. The stats are visible in the box on the right-hand side, so each character has like its own little stats for his different abilities. Now, when you make a move, it might be successful, or the opposing team can block the ball or even take control of the ball. And again, you don't control this. The outcomes are all like in RPG battles, randomized, with the stats figured in. Now, one thing I couldn't really figure out is how to get your team to intercept when an opposing player has the ball. Often, they'll get the ball and just run to your goal unopposed. The manual doesn't really say anything about this. As a result, often they'll try to score, your goalie will block, they'll catch the ball again, and try to score again, and so on. You can have your goalie try to catch the ball, but this almost always fails. Now, Robin, or Tsubasa, is far and away the best player in the team, and his kicks have a much better chance of getting past a goalie. He also has special moves, like for example that ridiculous-looking bicycle kick he just performed a moment ago. If you ever get one of those, that's a really good way to get a goal. Later in the game, he'll get some really powerful moves, but he has to level up first before he can do any of those. Now, sometimes your player will intercept an opponent with the ball, and you can assign moves to stop him, or to try to get the ball back, like a tackle, cut, and so on. And again, here the outcomes are pretty random. Now, if the game ends in a tie, there is going to be what's called a penalty kick competition. Now, as far as I can tell, it's pretty much pure luck. You choose whether you want to kick the ball left or right, while the CPU's goalie decides to either jump left or right, and you do the opposite when you're guarding the goal. So it's pure luck. You just have to guess left or right correctly. Better players like Robin can often get a goal in even if the goalie jumps in the right direction. After the game, some players will level up, so to speak. You gain experience from performing certain moves a lot during the game. This will cause your stats to increase between games, eventually, as I mentioned, leading to the specialty moves. Okay, so I've won the game here, and the coach is telling me that these two characters are going to become better players, that is, certain stats are going to increase. Now, it's really kind of hard to know what to make of this game, and it's great that Tecmo came up with something completely different than all the other soccer games we've had. Once you get used to the concept, I guess it's pretty fun to play. I mean, the graphics, animation in particular, are really excellent. As you run down the field and jump and kick, everything looks very smooth, and the stylization used in the characters' movements make everything look really exciting. So, if you've never tried this game, I would definitely recommend it. Alright, it's our last Japanese game from April, though we do still have a couple US only releases to check out. And this is Sensha Senryaku, Sabaku no Kitsune, or Tank Tactics Desert Fox, also known in the West as Desert Commander, from our old buddies Kemco. Let me assure you right away, this actually makes a lot more sense than Superman. Though what doesn't make any sense is this intro. Somehow that tank blew itself up? That's impossible. Or maybe another tank shot that one. So anyway, we have two play modes here, versus the computer or versus the second player. Here's one disappointing fact about Desert Commander right off the bat. There are only 5 campaigns. Yes, that's it, and while we can't really compare this to a modern game like Warcraft 3 or something, even compared to contemporary titles, that's kinda lame. Military Madness had 16 distinct levels, each of which had 2 versions. Though one nice detail, you can reallocate the number of your units assigned to you. So if you don't like a particular unit, you can drop it and get more units of something else instead. And if you're a cheating bastard, you can actually do the same to the CPU's units. Alright, so what do we have here? Well, that military hat is your headquarters, and you have tanks, armored cars, infantry, artillery, anti-aircraft guns, bombers, fighter planes, and lame transport trucks. Each unit has like a certain number of spaces it can move per turn, depending on the terrain, and terrain can also affect things like attack power. And different types of units have strong or weak defense against certain other types of units. So if you've played modern Western type strategy games, you can probably just jump right in here. This will make a lot more sense than something like Meitantei with its wacky battle system. You and the CPU or other player take turns, but the CPU moves much quicker than Fleet Commander, thank God. He's actually going to try to use his bombers here, I think, to soften up my ground forces. I just happen to have my anti-aircraft gun handy, and the battles are nice and quick. Just a few moments of animated explosions, and then you'll see the results. So there's none of those painfully protracted battles like in Meitantei or that SD Gundam game. Now, maybe you wonder about the original Japanese version of the game, like what changes were made when it was brought over to the US. Well, it actually doesn't seem to be a whole lot different. That's the same title screen here, though I suppose the Japanese writing looks a little more badass. Same intro, same number of levels. In fact, everything looks exactly the same as the US version. Yeah, so this really looks pretty much identical to the US game, except, wait 1 second. Holy cow, you play as the Nazis in this game? Well, Japan and Germany were on the same side, and that explains the name Desert Fox. So apparently, you are playing as Rommel's Afrika Korps. Though, of course, in military simulation games for computers, you generally could play on either side, like you could play Rommel in Electronic Arts Patton vs. Rommel, for example. And of course, Rommel is generally considered to be sort of a good guy since he did things like refuse to kill Jewish POWs. However, Nintendo of America undoubtedly would not approve the swastika, and so it has been removed. Now the objective, by the way, is to defeat the enemy's headquarters, which is completely mobile and can be moved around just like any other unit. I've almost got him down to the wire here. As you can see, he still has a few forces left, but I'm going to move some of my guys in and attack his little blue headquarters there. And once you've done that, you'll win the campaign and you'll get a nice little cut screen showing the other team surrendering and so on. And then it just takes you back to the menu and you can play another campaign if you'd like. But there's no overarching story to the game, just individual campaigns that really have like no historical context or anything, just sort of like just 5 generic battles. And it's strictly military tactics. I mean, there's no resources to capture, you can't build new units or capture towns, though you do need to refuel from time to time, so you have to sort of make sure that there's like an airstrip under your control. So I'm going to call this probably the most playable of all the military simulation games we've seen so far. There's nothing spectacular or original about it, and it's quite short compared to other games like Battles Napoleon, but still, I mean, it's pretty usable. You know, the menus all work well, and it moves pretty quickly. So, a good job, Kemco, but still, it's no Military Madness. Okay, we've got an awesome intro here. Some pretty exciting music will start up in a second. A mysterious dude with white hair and sunglasses blows up a helicopter. Now, what does this have anything to do with the game? No idea. If you read the manual, it says nothing about anybody wanting to blow up helicopters or who this dude is. It's almost like this was originally created for another game. Well, at any rate, this is Freedom Force, a US-only release from Sunsoft that utilizes the Zapper. What this game is really about is this. Terrorists, or guerrillas as the manual calls them, have kidnapped hostages in an airport. Your job? Shoot the terrorists and don't shoot the hostages. Your character's job description is actually Terminator. Oh yeah, and the enemies are described as bagmen. No, Sunsoft, you've got it all wrong. Bagmen are the guys in criminal organizations that transport money or goods. They don't literally wear bags on their heads. And they're not the guys that would normally be given the job of taking over an airport and holding hostages. Well, anyway, there's not really much explanation required in a game like this. You shoot those guys before they shoot you. If you get hit, your health will drop. If you shoot a hostage in error, the error meter will fill up a bit. If you lose all health or shoot too many hostages, you die. The one thing I do wonder is why there are so many emergency exit doors on that plane, and who closes the doors after you shoot a guy. Something to keep an eye on is your ammo. If your ammo starts getting low, take a look at that box in the lower right hand corner. An icon will occasionally appear there. Usually it's an ammo refill or even a different weapon. Shooting the icon will give you whatever item happens to be in the box at the time. But you have to be pretty darn quick as they show up for only about a second. Now at some point the level will just mysteriously end and you'll move on to the next one. There are 4 regular levels, and once you've gotten past level 4 you'll go back to level 1 again. You'll have to repeat the whole cycle a few times before you get to like the final 5th level, which is the bad guy's main base or something like that. One weird thing about Freedom Force, you only have 1 life. If you die once, it's game over. Your life bar is pretty decent sized, but enemy attacks will often take off more than 1 chunk. Grenades and machine guns, for example, will take a huge chunk. It doesn't sound that bad, except that it doesn't refill when you finish a level. In theory, medical kits can be picked up by shooting them when they appear in the bottom corner there. I say in theory because it seems like they never do. When I took a look at the video for this segment, the only time a medical kit actually appeared was at the very beginning of the first level, which doesn't make any sense because I wouldn't need any medical kits then. And then once, for like a split second in the middle of the first level. And like I said, they flash on screen so quickly you have to be super quick. So in practicality, you can only take a few hits before you get a game over. In other words, you have to be a really quick draw since having 3 guys shooting you at once is not uncommon. So Freedom Force, not really a great game, more like a pleasant time waster. LJN and Atlas are back. The same team that brought you Karate Kid and Team C Surf Designs now take aim at America's pastime. What horrors shall be wrought? Let's take a look. Though, the music is pretty catchy. Major League Baseball is the name, and we actually see the official Major League Baseball logo here. Now, for those of you in various parts of the world who don't know what all this hoo-ha means, let's clarify. Major League Baseball is the name of a company that runs the 2 big pro baseball US leagues, the American League and the National League. In order to use any real-life pro baseball team names, you have to go through the MLB. On the other hand, the MLBPA, Major League Baseball Players Association, is a union for Major League Baseball ball players. You needed to get their permission to use the names of pro ball players in a game, like Tengen did with RBI Baseball. LJN, however, just acquired the licensing rights from the MLB. Therefore, they are able to call the game Major League Baseball and use the real team names, though not real players' names or likenesses. In fact, this is the first game to do so on a console since the Intellivision days. So while all the teams are represented by their full names, the team members are just numbers, though they do all have distinct stats. First thing to do is select your team and your players, and then it's play ball. So hey, this looks like someone ripped off the code from Namco's Family Stadium. Well, that couldn't be because this plays much worse than that game. In fact, Major League Baseball is all kinds of terrible. One thing that just bugs me is the swing mechanic. You need to hold down the button to fully swing. Pressing it or not holding it down long enough will cause you to bunt. However, most of the game's problems rear their head when you're actually pitching or fielding. Pitching controls are adequate, though you can't adjust the location of the pitcher while he's on the mound. And of course, the CPU will hit almost everything you throw at it. And of course, fielding is impossible since you can't see where your outfielders are until the ball actually reaches them. But the kicker, the ball seems to move slower than the runners, meaning the batter is probably already on first base by the time the ball reaches your fielder, unless it's a fly ball that just happens to land right near first base or you happen to catch it. The batter is going to get to first safely. You just can't throw a ball to first quickly enough. But really, I shouldn't make any generalizations about the behavior of the ball in this game, since it does some really weird stuff, like sort of speed up and slow down in midair. In a nutshell, the physics are whack in this game. If you were to play Major League Baseball, you're probably not going to like it, since so many tiny flaws all kind of add up to a really awful game. Did Atlus program this themselves? Who knows? Game Developer Research Institute has revealed that they did a certain amount of subcontracting to other people with these games. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. Either way, still, shame on LJN, shame on you too, Atlus. This is definitely the worst baseball game we've seen on the Nintendo Entertainment System so far. Alright, May 1988 is here, and let's kick it off with an FDS game from Konami. Yep, Konami keeps kicking out the FDS jams. This one is known as Final Commando Akakage or Final Commando Red Fortress. The intro explains you'll need a pocket full of miracles and the ferocity of a wild, bloody rose. What? It's odd enough for a Konami run and gun to reference a Frank Capra movie, but wild, bloody rose? Anyway, you saw your characters there just a moment ago, and what gets me is, why is this called Final Commando if there are 4 guys? Which one is the so-called Final Commando? Anyway, what we have here is a vehicular run and gun, in other words, a drive-in gun. Does it look familiar? Well, it should, because it was based on this 1986 arcade game known in the West as, wait for it, Top Gunner. However, the original Japanese title was Tokushu Butai Jackal, Special Forces Jackal. One major difference in the Japanese game, your machine gun can shoot in any direction. In the US version, it only shoots up. In Europe, the arcade game was called simply Jackal. So naturally, when Konami chose to release this on cartridge in the US, they used the name Top Gunner? No, Jackal. Note the character portraits have been changed up just a little bit. So to sum it up, the Japanese arcade game was Tokushu Butai Jackal, Famicom version Final Commando, Akai Yosai, US arcade name Top Gunner, US NES name Jackal. Makes perfect sense, Konami. Alright, so what's going on here? Well, the US version has a whole extra first level, a beach level, much like the arcade game starts off with. And the bit with your Jeep being dropped off by a cargo plane was also not in the Japanese version either. So in this game you have 2 weapons, a machine gun and grenades, both with infinite ammo. Your objective, aside from killing everybody, is to rescue the POWs found in those little huts. Rescuing officers will upgrade your weapons. The grenades become missiles, which become quite powerful. Alright, here we go. First boss battle. Features 4 super tanks. Nothing too special here. Also new to the US version are these crazy interlevel illustrations. Here? What does that mean? The FDS game just had boring loading screens. They also added these Ghosts and Goblins-like progression screens. Now the second level in the US version is the first level in the Japanese game, but there's a major difference between the 2 games. The levels are actually wider horizontally in the US version. The screen scrolls a bit. There's quite a bit more extra stuff on the left and the right edges. So Jackal is really a substantially different game than Final Commando. And both are very different from the arcade game. I don't think these things would in the arcade Jackal. Missile shooting statues? This game can be pretty tough. Nothing like being pinned down by a missile barrage and having planes unholy buzz you and dropping bombs. Now here's the third boss. Things get a bit tougher. Giant aircraft carrier full of gun ports. Almost like a compile boss or something like that. You have to shoot out each of the gun ports. And the boss battles always have enemy vehicles popping up at the bottom of the screen just to make things a bit more difficult. So the structure of Jackal is this. There are 6 levels, each involves blowing up a series of gates, blowing up some huts, collecting POWs, and dropping off a helicopter. 6 levels total. Nothing too crazy or new here, but surprises do exist. Here you might be tempted to drive over the tracks to avoid the mines, however suddenly a train comes rushing up behind you. It took me by surprise and killed me the first time I played Jackal. And this game can be quite tough the first time you pick it up. Like right there is a hut. Naturally you think there's POWs, but instead a particularly dangerous tank comes out. Jackal does keep you on your toes. The game gradually gets harder as it goes along. Crossing bridges can get pretty hectic, especially when a bomber flies by. Though I'd say Jackal isn't really that difficult until the very end, in the last level, and it gets brutal quite quickly. We're approaching the final battle here, the enemy's main base. The last level is just a series of parking lots or landing strips or something, but heavily fortified, often with mounted guns that shoot a constant stream of bullets at you. We're almost at the very end here, and suddenly the game throws in guided missiles. You can't shoot the missile silo from here, because those barricades are in your way. You have to get around the barricades and then blow it up. I'm actually quite frankly amazed they got through this particular section in one piece while making this video. Luckily extra lives aren't that tough to obtain, and you'll definitely need them at the end. After dealing with the missiles, you pass through a gauntlet of mounted machine guns that are pretty damn hard to hit. It's not real easy to aim diagonally, and often that's the only way to take those things out. Should you avoid the constant attacks from every single angle, you'll come face to face with the final boss, who turns out to be a gigantic fortress. Now, if you're playing this, here's a little tip. An airplane will immediately dive bomb you at the very start of the boss fight, so immediately take cover. Okay, so you've got guns shooting at you, tanks shooting at you, and those black craters in the ground, you actually can't drive over them, so it's real easy to get stuck on those. By the way, this guy is basically the same boss as in the arcade game, same final boss. Now, should you miraculously survive the total chaos in this boss battle, you will blow up the base, and then, ta-da, there's a final boss, a giant tank. Another spectacular and enormous Konami boss, armed with a machine gun, turret, and a huge flamethrower. Another little hint, move over to one side so you can't get hit by the flamethrower, then you can sort of go up and down and throw grenades at the guy. If you have a lot of spare lives, you can probably take a few risks, otherwise, play it safe. Eventually the tank will turn orange, then red, then blow up. I sense we're almost there. Fantastic. As far as boss battles go, this one was pretty tough. However, if you're expecting a scene where you drive away and the base blows up behind you, in typical Konami style, well, unfortunately, it doesn't happen here. Oh yeah, and hey kids, you know what I want to do after defeating the forces of evil? Reward myself with a nice, relaxing cigar. Oh yeah, and by the way, winners don't do drugs. So Jackal is sort of Contra turned on its head. Rather than the US release being cut down, we get an expanded version with extra levels, between level bonus scenes, all kinds of little extras. I'm not sure if the full game was developed and then content was removed in order to make Final Commando fit on the FDS, or if it was expanded to make Jackal. Either way, the Western version is clearly the definitive version, and one of the classic titles for the NES. Oh boy, an RPG from Square, but it's only another Deep Dungeon game. You can tell the FDS is now in trouble. Even Deep Dungeon games are coming out on cartridges. First two were published by the DOG, a consortium of small developers of FDS games, but with Deep Dungeon 3, Square ended up publishing it directly themselves as a cartridge. So, like the first two games, Deep Dungeon 3 was created by Hummingbird Soft, and like the previous games, it is an extremely old-fashioned first-person dungeon crawler. I guess Square must sort of knock some sense into the guys at Hummingbird Soft, as they have added a few modern elements to this one, probably very grudgingly. First and foremost, you can now have more than one character. You can actually have 4 members in your party. And you can choose from a whopping 3 different classes, Hunter, Monk, and Mage. Alright, so it's not exactly Final Fantasy, but at least it's a bit of progress. Now when I call Deep Dungeon a dungeon crawler, I mean it. It's all about the dungeons. You can never leave the dungeons. There are now towns in the game, but the towns are also in a dungeon. Now I'm no civil engineer, but shouldn't cities be built above ground, not inside a dungeon? That's really going to greatly impede growth and development of this town. So anyway, you have your inns, shops, churches, all the standard Dragon Quest Final Fantasy stuff. Except that because everything is a maze, it's going to be much harder to get around than in most RPG towns. You can't just walk to the inn, you have to walk around the maze and find it first. Incidentally, while Deep Dungeon never came to the West, we do have this very incomplete translation available, which will show us most of the menus and whatnot in English. So once you've got your armor, that's what I'm buying here. Silk. It's a bad choice of materials for armor. So once you got all this stuff, armor, magic, whatever, you actually have to find the exit to the real dungeon. This might take you a little while. I can't learn any magic yet. I think you have to have more experience. Ah, there's a ladder. Alright. Now we're in the actual dungeon. Boy, that was quick. Battle is normal turn-based combat done through menus, except for one thing. Make sure you equip your armor and weapons first, otherwise you'll get killed immediately. Now, I'm not sure what it was back in the 80s, but the folks who designed these games apparently had a very difficult time wrapping their head around the idea of easy-to-navigate menus. Here, every time you equip something, the entire menu closes, so you need to reopen it for every item you want to equip. Why not just have it go back to the previous menu, so you don't have to, keep opening up the menu over and over again? Why do they make these menus so hard? Were they trying to make the game longer by adding cumbersome menus? See there, whenever you equip something, the menu closes entirely. Alright, so I'm equipped. Let's go and find some monsters. Like so many old JRPGs, Deep Dungeon has absolutely no problem randomly throwing enemies at you that can kill you in one hit. I encountered these skeleton guys like literally 10 steps from the entrance to the first dungeon. These games really make you appreciate just how playable the early Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy games were in comparison. They don't really pull this kind of crap on you. Anyway, if you manage to somehow avoid these skeleton guys, you'll march around the rather nondescript dungeon and fight monsters, represented by little teeny tiny graphics inside that small box in the middle of the screen. It's definitely not the best screen layout I've ever seen. You will very slowly level up, and you even get to choose which attributes you want to spend your points on when you gain a level. So really, Deep Dungeon resembles like old Western-style RPGs like Wizardry more than contemporary Japanese RPGs. And as before, there's no sort of auto map, so pen and paper for making maps is virtually required. Random enemy encounters are disturbingly high. You don't have to be moving to run to enemies. That's right, you could actually just be sitting there and an enemy will attack you. Once you have finished the battle, you will often encounter, more enemies before you actually get a chance to even move forward one spot. So despite some changes being made to the formula, this still looks an awful lot like the first two games, and it's not really a lot of fun, so let's keep our fingers crossed for Deep Dungeon 4. Adventure game time! Can you believe it? It's been over 2 weeks since there was a mystery adventure game for the Famicom. We now have Toachiki to thank for this one, Meitantei Holmes, Kiri no London Satsujin Jiken, Great Detective Holmes, Fog of London Murder Case, starring the world's greatest ever cokehead detective, Sherlock Holmes. I've actually got a nice little animated intro here, though not much of one really. A woman enters a door. Presumably that's Holmes' house? So the plot concerns, guess what? A rich guy has disappeared. What a surprise. William Norton, some big shot, has vanished, and his daughter, Veronica, wants you to find him. As always, we have the standard Portopia-style interface, typical menu options. Once we see them here, there's move, talk, look, examine, call, show, etc. You spend most of the game yakety-yakking with various NPCs. Most of these Japanese mystery games work this way. Those of you with really excellent memories might realize this is not Toichiki's first Sherlock Holmes adventure game. Nope, back in 1986 we saw this little gem, which is more like an action-adventure game, most notable for its depiction of British citizens as being heavily armed maniacs who go around firing guns randomly in the streets. Toichiki would release one last Holmes game in 1989. So going back to Meitantei Holmes, it does have one unusual feature. Rather than moving around from location to location using the menu, you travel around on an overworld map representing London. I think I've entered the Times office here. As far as I can tell, all the locations here more or less correspond to where they would be in real-life London at that time. You can find, for example, Scotland Yard, St. Bartholomew Hospital, Baker Street, and so on. Now, walking around is pretty slow, and if you don't know where a location is, it's pretty rough, so you have the option of using a cab, which will actually take you directly to a specified location, though this does cost money, so you can't go too wild on cab rides. There's the cab location menu there. The production values on this game are really not too hot. Note that the graphics that you see in the upper left-hand corner there, that sort of stands for, your first-person viewpoint, those are entirely monochrome. Toichiki is not really known for making great games, and as far as I can tell, this doesn't have a real great reputation in Japan. Though it should be pointed out, this is developed, or at least programmed, by the rather infamous company Another, the same guys behind Hoshi no Mirohitu, which was that super awful sci-fi RPG we saw a while back. The one where your hit points weren't even displayed correctly. The game seems more competently made than that, but the exact extent of Another's work isn't really known. All we know is that their name appears in the code. Besides that, this is pretty much your typical adventure game. The magic words that make our hearts leap with gladness. Toei Animation and Shoei System. Yeah, it's another gem from that wonderful team that brought us the likes of Hokuto no Ken. Boy, the title screen even looks kind of like the screen for Hokuto no Ken. Alright, so what's this game based on, you wonder? Well, Kamen no Ninja Akakage, or Red Shadow, was an old Toei TV show from the 1960s it's about a masked ninja. Not just any masked ninja, but probably the only ninja who ever wore a ridiculous red scarf. So much for blending into the shadows. Akakage, you understand, is not one of those, sneaky ninjas. Well, anyway, the reason that this game exists was because Toei had just put out an animated version of Akakage on television. So in this game you do what ninjas do, namely run down the street in broad daylight for no apparent reason. Naturally, other ninjas try to kill you since you're pretty much a disgrace to the ninja profession. As you can see, this is one of those games where you can just sort of keep running and the enemies won't really bother you. And also we have baby ninjas? First boss is rather boring, he's just a regular guy. You can take him out by equipping your throwing stars and just basically spam him. Once you've defeated him, well, nothing happens, you just sort of go on to the next level with no fanfare. This boss is at least interesting looking. It's like a big transparent bird. I guess at this point we're officially at level 2. After this, more boring running past enemies. Now keep an eye on these enemies here. Watch out for something in just one moment. Look at that! They just completely vanished. There's only ever one type of enemy on the screen at once, and when you cross the invisible line and enter the section with new enemies, any old enemies on the screen simply disappear. This seems to be a problem with Shoei System's games. In Tsukuban Deka 3, when you moved into the area where new enemies would appear, your character would actually be frozen for a second. Well, I guess this is better than Hokuto no Ken and Tsukuban Deka 3, but still, it's a pretty lousy game in most regards. Sure, it looks less ugly than Hokuto no Ken, but still, there's pretty much zero thought put into such things as level design and enemy placement. Wow, so a great episode we got going here today. So far, Another makes an appearance, now Shoei System, maybe Tosa and Macronix will also show up this episode. The next game we have up is a reasonably well-known Japanese adventure game, so I think probably now is a good time to have a brief history of the genre. I assume that many of you watching are somewhat familiar with adventure games, but if not, I guess it's never too late to learn. Like RPGs, it's possible to trace the history and evolution of adventure games, but it's pretty much impossible to provide an all-encompassing definition. Generally, adventure games involve telling a story through the exploration and interaction with a well-defined environment. This may include puzzles, dialogue with NPCs, and inventory management, but usually does not focus on fast-paced action or require quick reflexes or manual dexterity to play. In fact, generally in adventure games, you don't normally engage in combat with enemies. So in other words, we aren't talking about these types of games. Games like Zelda can be considered to be action-adventure games, rather than pure adventure games. Adventure games got their start on good old-fashioned mainframe computers, and were originally strictly text-based. Most histories of the genre trace its origins back to an early attempt at artificial intelligence called Elysion, which was a very simple little program designed by Joseph Weizenbaum in 1966, sort of a psychiatrist simulation. You can converse with the program and it'll answer back, but it is very clearly just picking out words and pasting them into canned responses. It's very easy to confuse Elysion by typing in weird comments, but it must have seemed pretty impressive back in the day. I mean, actually talking to a computer. Supposedly one day Weizenbaum walked in on his secretary pouring her heart out to the computer console. Now Elysion was not a game, but it provided the basic idea for the adventure game. You talk to a computer and it answers back. Perhaps the first true adventure game was Colossal Cave Adventure, also simply called Adventure or even Advent, created for the PDP-10 computer in 1975 by Will Crowther. The premise is simple. You explore a virtual cave based on real-life mammoth caves. The game will give you a short description of your surroundings, and then you would issue a command. Say, north for move one space north, or get key to pick up a key. It understood a total of about 190 words. You always sort of have to phrase your comments in a way the computer will actually understand. Now, the game spread quite quickly in the computer programming scene, and other people altered and added on to the game, putting in more fantasy elements like dragons and elves. Practically every element found in early adventure games has its origin here, including the maze, described as, you are in a maze of twisty little passages all alike. Not to mention the entire concept of exploring an imaginary world. Also, looking for items, picking up items, putting them into your inventory, and then using them to interact with the environments, for example, finding a key to open a door. Again, this is all stuff that we take for granted like every single video game out there today. A few years later, commercial versions for home computers began appearing, the first of which was Adventureland, released by a company called Adventure International in 1978, founded by a guy named Scott Adams. Adventure International was the first big player in the home computer adventure game genre. Other commercial versions of Adventure also included one released by Microsoft in 1981. Adventure's influence extended well beyond the nascent text adventure genre. Warren Robinette at Atari decided to make his own version of Adventure in 1978. Since a text game would have been impossible on the Atari 2600, a graphical representation was created. Such innovations as multiple rooms, mazes, inventory, puzzles, and a rudimentary plot. With all these things together, Adventure essentially created the action-adventure genre and influenced, I guess, probably about every single action game we play today. Meanwhile, a group of computer geeks at MIT decided to make their own adventure-style game. The result, Zork, was so popular that the creators formed a software company named Infocom and released it commercially in 1980 for the Radio Shack TRS-80 computer. It was a huge success, selling around 400,000 copies, and was, I suppose, the very first must-have computer game. If you think how many people had computers back then, 400,000 copies is actually very, very good. Infocom became the big player in the adventure game field, releasing various Zork sequels and remakes, and hit after hit in the early to mid-80s, such as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Leather Goddesses of Phobos, and The Lurking Whore. Sadly, as the text adventure game's popularity waned, Infocom was bought out by Activision and eventually disappeared in 1989. Scott Adams was also quite successful, releasing a series of text adventure games such as Pirate's Adventure, with its virtually illegible font, and Quest Probe, a series of tie-ins with Marvel Comics. Still, his games featured very primitive text parsers and only handled two-word sentences. One thing about this genre is they don't always play fair. It's often pretty easy to die. Here, for example, all you have to do is move towards the window, you fall out and kill yourself. The end. Adventure International went out of business in 1985. So what caused this shift in people's interests? Well, in 1979, Ken and Roberta Williams formed a little company called Online Systems, as Roberta was designing a mystery-themed adventure game. The resulting game, Mystery House, was released in 1980 in little homemade plastic bag packagings for the Apple II. Now the difference was graphics. Each area featured a little illustration, kind of crudely drawn illustration, of what you were seeing. If there was a note on the ground, you could see the note in the drawing. This revelation took the adventure game world by storm. Suddenly, the all-text adventure was replaced with illustrated text. Oh yeah, one cute little feature of the game was that if you cursed at it, it would actually kick you out of the game. It's hard to believe that the Williamses were prudes because one of their very next games was called Soft Porn Adventure. Perhaps the biggest hit of the era was 1982's The Hobbit from Melbourne House. Known for its very colorful illustrations and its rather sophisticated text parser, it eventually sold 1 million copies. Melbourne House eventually changed its name to Beam, released tons of crappy games for the Spectrum, and then started releasing bad games for consoles, like the NES Back to the Future games. So for a while, these kind of games were enormously popular, and companies from all over the world were making them. For example, Magnetic Scrolls from the UK. Here's one of their games called The Pawn. Again, it looks a lot like The Hobbit. One thing you may have noticed about these games is that it's pretty easy to die very quickly. Here, for example, reading a letter will cause you to sort of die and you have to start over again. The try again, reload, or quit screen became a very common sight during this time period. And then the text adventure game just sort of chugged along for several years, eventually gaining the name interactive fiction to distinguish it from the more modern adventure-style games. It still exists today as like an ultra-niche genre, with new games being released mostly non-commercially. Okay, so what killed off the illustrated text adventure game? Well, in 1984, Online Systems, now called Sierra Online, released a little game called King's Quest. It was an adventure game that used a traditional text parser, but you moved, not by typing in commands like Go West, but actually moving your character around on screen, just like an arcade or a console game. Even more amazingly, there was like a very primitive sort of 3D here. You could move in front of or behind objects which were drawn in perspective. Compared to, say, The Hobbit, this is utterly mind-blowing. Though, guess what? It's also incredibly easy to get killed in this. By today's standards, King's Quest is very clunky, unforgiving, and really quite frustrating. If you try playing without like a FAQ, you're going to end up pulling your hair out before too long. Too much of the game involves trying to find like little hidden items that are scattered randomly around the world. Now, other than walking around, all the other commands were still entered in by typing in text. One part of the challenge in any of these games is to get the computer to understand what you want it to do. You know what I mean, like, let's say you see something that looks like a staff. Type in take the staff. It replies, I don't know what a staff is. Take the rod. I don't know what a rod is. Take the scepter, and so on. You have to figure out the right word for what you're trying to do. Sierra games were actually notorious for frequent deaths arising for doing something like opening a door, also unintuitive puzzles, and getting stuck in an unfinishable game if you neglected to pick up some object earlier in the game. One of the more notorious examples being King's Quest IV. Not finding an invisible item hidden behind a rock will result in you not being able to make any progress later, since you can't go back if you miss that item. Same thing happened in the first two Leisure Suit Larry games. This makes Sierra games really exercises in aggravation for all but the very most patient players. Well, regardless of King's Quest's faults, it was a huge hit, so Sierra followed up with more games using the same game engine. There was Police Quest, Space Quest, Leisure Suit Larry, Quest for Glory. They just kept pumping them out. And don't get me wrong, these are in many ways great games, just expect to see your death occur very frequently and described by the game in loving, gory detail. Still, once they introduced the graphical adventure game, it was here to stay. There was no going back to the older style illustrated text games, and Sierra ruled the roost for the rest of the decade. Well, that about covers the origins of the adventure game genre in the West, but what about Japan? Well, old Japanese adventure games are a bit more obscure, often appearing on mysterious computer systems like the XM7 or the PC 6001, and the language barrier can be insurmountable. Still, let's take a look at what was going on over there. So when did the adventure game reach Japanese shores? Not sure, but the home computer scene began in earnest in the very early 1980s. One of those early software houses was Microcabinet. In 1982, they produced a dumbed-down ripoff of Mystery House for the NEC PC-88 called Mystery House. This game at least had the courtesy to show you all the acceptable commands on the title screen. There they are right there, as a matter of fact. And the text parser was a little odd, to say the least. It could only take one word at a time. So to open a door, you would type open and then enter, and then type door. It would be entered as two separate commands. Still, I guess it was a start, and the graphics, I suppose, are not bad, and unlike the original Mystery House, they're in full color. Though as we will see with many of these PC-88 games, the color always fills in line by line on these things. I guess it's just the way the CPU worked. Anyway, in 1983, a legit port of Mystery House was released by a little-known company called StarCraft. Not sure what that name is all about, but it has no relation, I'm sure, to the computer game that you all know and love. This was pretty faithful to the original, though the art was all redrawn and actually improved. If you compare this to the rather funky-looking house in the original Sierra game, it looks much better. The game is difficult to play since, like some of these other early titles, you actually have to type in Japanese. Now, a lot of similar games, though pretty much undocumented in the West, appeared. For example, this one, Dreamland, also by Microcabinet, also from 1983. Though this uses commands in the Roman alphabet, such as the traditional W, E, and S for directions. What the game is about, I'm really not sure, but it looks sort of like a cutesy style adventure game. Princess Tomato and the Salad Kingdom would be another example of the sort of cute, whimsical, silly style of Japanese adventure game. Again, notice the very primitive graphics. Another company that was rather prolifically publishing computer games at this time was Enix. In 1983, Enix released a game called Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken, designed by a young Yuji Horii. Of all the games here, Portopia was certainly the most influential and copied, kicking off a mania for murder mystery adventure games in Japan, as viewers of Chrontendo already know. Plenty of these things hit the market in the mid to late 80s. One thing that I believe that Portopia is at least partially responsible for is the trend in Japanese games of moving away from exploring an environment, like so many Western games revolve around, to interacting with other people. There's a lot of talking in Portopia. Now, a much younger company than Enix made their debut in 1984 with a game called The Death Trap. The company, Square, was just a handful of college students. Among them was the game's producer, Hironobu Sakaguchi, along with later Square stalwarts like Hiromichi Tanaka. Though it did do well enough to warrant a sequel, Will, The Death Trap 2, which was supposedly the first Japanese adventure computer game to feature animated graphics. Incidentally, someone who wrote the Wikipedia article about Death Trap says that it sold 500,000 copies, but this seems a little unlikely to me. Meanwhile, Enix and Yuji Horii pumped out two more mystery games, the last being Karuizawa Yukai Anai. By this point, game designers in Japan were doing away with the clunky text parsers and instead allowing players to interact using the number pad. Numbered options would appear along the side, so instead of typing in talk, you hit the corresponding number. Also, there's a little overworld map on this, making it sort of an ancestor to Dragon Quest. By 1985, the Nintendo Famicom was dominating the Japanese video game scene, and once again, Yuji Horii led the way, redesigning the number pad control scheme to work with the NES controller D-pad. This became standard for console adventure games, which pretty soon, as we know, flooded the Famicom. In 1987, even Nintendo was cashing in, and released this curious little game called Nakayama Miho no Tokimeki High School. Aside from the typical adventure stuff, you need to engage in dialogue with the title character in order to win her heart, making this like a proto-dating sim. And just like in US adventure games from people like Sierra, a single wrong choice could end the game. How very sad. As the 1980s moved on, we began to sort of see more romance-oriented games such as Microcabinet's Maison Ikoku, based on the popular manga. This was later ported to the PC Engine, and the Famicom as well, but the PC Engine version has been translated into English, so we actually will see this game in more detail later on. What we're looking at here is for the MSX2 computer, which explains why the graphics and sound are a lot better than most of the other adventure games we've been seeing so far. But still, for the most part, most of these games that we've been seeing might be what you call aesthetically challenged, since the PC-88, which was the genre's main platform, wasn't really that great at pretty pictures and noises. As the 80s progressed, the PC-98 took over, and we started to see games that actually looked good and had, music, believe it or not, as opposed to just little clicky noises. Enix, after the success of Dragon Quest, began to sort of scale back their PC game releases, but they did still release a few weird adventure games, like Angelus, which was about some reporters investigating the outbreak of a horrible new disease. It also has some random nudity as well. This game actually looks pretty creepy. Now, of all these games, this is the one that you're going to be the most interested in. Snatcher, the 1988 game released for the PC-88 and the MSX2, designed by Hideo Kojima. This is right after he did Metal Gear. What we're looking at is an unofficial translation of the MSX2 version. Now, while Snatcher does use the typical numeric input to pick choices out of a menu, there's some action sequences, some shooting sequences in there as well. What really sort of makes it take off is the high quality of the graphics and the writing. It really sort of stands out from the crowd. I mean, this game actually looks very cool, and it's good to play as well. It's sort of like a cyberpunk-style Blade Runner ripoff set in 1991. Snatcher was, I guess, deemed to have enough universal appeal to get a US release a few years down the road on the Sega CD. It's the same game, but it's definitely a little prettier looking than this. But still, this looks very good for a Japanese computer game in 1988. Now, it should be mentioned that while adult games existed pretty much from day one on Japanese home computers, I mean, even Enix made them, the adult adventure game really began to flourish around the late 80s, since the PC-98 was capable of anime-style graphics, as we see here. Perhaps the most popular and long-lived series of these sorts of games was Rants, the first game coming out in 1989. The publisher Alisoft would become one of the more well-known producers of this sort of stuff. Rants is actually sort of an adventure RPG hybrid and would spawn numerous sequels. Well, I guess that pretty much wraps up the first half of our adventure game history. The second part, covering the golden age of adventure gaming, will show up in episode 32. So we'll see you then. Now let's move on to our next game. Here we are at last, Salad no Kuni no Tomato Princess from Hudson, or as we call it, Princess Tomato in Salad Kingdom. One of the weirdest damn adventure games ever, and one that has developed quite a cult following over the years. But is it any good? So the game starts you off on the road to Zucchini Mountains to rescue the Tomato Princess from the evil Minister Pumpkin, who has somehow allied himself with humans in order to terrorize the Salad Kingdom. So off we go and immediately encounter one of the most beloved characters in video game history, Percy, the baby persimmon. Oh my, he's dying of thirst. What a shame. Luckily for him, there is a lake nearby. Such a cute little thing, isn't he? So once you find the lake, you'll go ahead, get some water, travel back to Percy, give him the water, and he'll now become your assistant and best buddy. And sure, Percy is ridiculous looking, but he's actually quite useful, for despite being a persimmon, he is a mighty finger warrior, meaning he can play rock, paper, scissors. And plus, look at that face. It's so adorable, you just want to smash it into the rock. So move up on the road a bit and you'll encounter his friends, the Lettuce King, who somehow made the cover art despite being in the game for just one scene. And then there's all these goofballs. It seems that the human farmers, or farmies, are imprisoning vegetables in their farms, and I would assume eating them. Now, Percy is hated for many reasons, one of which, at the end of each level, he'll tell you that he accidentally dropped or lost a number of items in the inventory. So naturally, you're like, great, I spent all this time picking up this stuff, and then he just loses half of it. Well, really, you should be grateful for Percy, because he actually only loses exactly the items which are no longer needed in the game. Many items are only used once, or have no use at all, so Percy basically saves you the hassle of having to do any sort of inventory maintenance. Now moving along, we actually have a special treat here. Let's take a look at the original Princess Tomato game released by Hudson for various Japanese computers back in 1984. Oh my god, that's Percy? It looks like roadkill. This is one ugly game, though not without its charms. It's an old school adventure game in the Mystery House style. You have to type in commands like give water. It's actually a lot different than the more familiar NES game. The basic story is the same, but there's also stuff that was added when it was ported to the NES. Like there's no rock, paper, scissors here, and you may have noticed there's actually a sword in your inventory. And the character designs and settings seem much more Japanese inspired. Now aside from this, there's actually an HTML remake for the first level, created by someone named Giovanni Faganello. This featured some really pretty new art, but sadly is no longer available online. So anyway, the game is divided into 9 discrete areas or levels. Once you get to the end of a level, you can't go back, so it's very linear. Now, at this point, we've been captured by Sergeant Pepper, a green pepper who turns red when he gets angry. He locks you in a movie serial villain type torture cell. Eventually, you escape, and in a horrifying turn of events, go back and find the lettuce prince, and the other vegetables have all been harvested, except for the watermelon, who was too ugly to eat, I guess. Pretty grim stuff. You will also very soon experience your first battles, and that's what the fight button is for. Though it's not you, it's Percy that does the fighting. Yeah, that's right, Percy is basically your enforcer. This farmie bears a striking resemblance to Homer Simpson. Now this fellow seems to think that coleslaw is made of cucumbers, oddly enough. That would actually be cabbage. Battles are fought as a game of rock, paper, and scissors, or janken as they call it in Japan. You use the D-pad to select either rock, paper, or scissors. If you win, you will then try to look the same direction as your opponent. Also done with the D-pad, you just try to guess the direction he's going to look. Normally you have to win several rounds in a row. This guy is a Saladron, sort of a living bowl of salad, including utensils. Crazy stuff. Though actually I really never understood why a human or a giant beast like Saladron would actually, defer to a vegetable after being defeated at rock, paper, scissors. Now the whole game is pretty weird, but a number of completely off-the-wall moments do stand out. Here you found a resistance base, and you actually meet this woman right here, who is Princess Tomato's sister, but the mind-boggling thing is she's a human being. The biological rules of this world seem to be pretty unorthodox, to say the least. A moment later you go to Lisa's room, and Percy seems to indicate that you should hit on her. A woman and a cucumber? Well actually I guess I would prefer not to go there. One hidden gag, she has a hidden picture of Tom Cruise on her wall. Not to mention the fact that the inhabitants of the vegetable kingdom seem to think nothing of eating vegetables or drinking vegetable juice. In the case of Peanut Town, the roofs are made out of peanut shells. Now, so far I haven't really discussed whether the game is any good. For those accustomed to, say, LucasArts-style adventure games, you will probably be a bit disappointed. The game is very linear, but also the puzzles are not really based on logic, but instead on performing a series of actions in a certain order. Here, for example, there's a hermit you need to talk to. Now his hut is just one screen away from this one, but the option to travel there does not appear until you talk to the peanut guy on the left. However, there is no option to talk to him, not until you use the look option to get a description of the surroundings. Even though you can see the guy, the game indicates there is no one to talk to until you look at him. And you will often have to look at the same screen or check the same object multiple times before you suddenly notice something. So it's not as much that you're solving puzzles as you're sort of trying the same options over and over again until you just happen to stumble across the rather arbitrary sequence of button presses the game wants you to make. Like here, for example, when I first encountered this cave, there was simply not this exit. It simply wasn't there. There was just a wall. It turns out I had to speak to the hermit again and get some medicine. What the medicine is for, I had no idea. It's not needed until the next level. But obtaining it makes the door magically appear. There's no way you could know that before you needed to get the medicine, and there's no logical connection between the medicine and the hermit and the door. So if you can't seem to make any progress in the game, just look at everything again, talk to everyone again, and hopefully something will unlock the passage or the door. Oh, here's a rather infamous moment. You discover the orange princess taking a shower. Though she doesn't seem very concerned about this, she calls you a pervert and gives you sort of a flirtatious wink. She'll tell you that the princess went on a walk in the garden, which really has no bearing at all on future events, but until you hear that, you actually will not be able to progress down the next hallway. Or all the doors are like locked or blocked until you actually go into that room, talk to the orange, and she gives you that completely useless little bit of information. This doesn't really qualify as a puzzle, per se. Here is the princess herself. And again, she doesn't really tell you that much that's useful, but you have to talk to her. After that, you get to wage finger war on an eggplant, and then go through the next door. But again, it's not like you encountered a locked door and the princess gave you a key or something. Rather, if you haven't spoken to her, the option for fighting this guy simply does not appear. The game essentially says, nope, you're not going anywhere yet, just keep wandering around until you do the right thing. So there's one more maze, more Jiken battles. Eventually, the princess is rescued, and then the pumpkin minister's son appears for one last final battle. There's been a caterpillar that you've been holding for like a couple levels. Suddenly it comes in useful. You can throw it at him and he'll run away. And then finally the game is over. And I should point out the finger war, the rock, paper, scissors. I mean, it's more or less just guessing. You just sort of randomly push up, down, side, whatever on the D-pad. Certain enemies will have certain patterns, but it's just sort of, there's really no strategy involved. This is sort of randomly hit buttons. Again, it's really not a whole lot of fun. Let's take a look at just one last thing here. Just one scene from the original computer game. Then I'll show you a shot of the Tomato Princess as she appeared on the PC-88 version. Oh baby. So the princess was desexified just a bit for the console game. But really the computer and the console games are very different, so you really can't blame the NES game's problems on being based on a 1984 adventure game, since pretty much everything was updated or reworked. And there are things to like about Princess Tomato. The interface is very easy to use, even though it has commands like praise that are only used maybe once. The graphics are great, the premise is highly original, and lots of cool, weird, or amusing things happen. It's just you sort of solve the game by pressing look, check, and talk over and over again until nothing new happens, then go on to the next screen. And it is, quite frankly, the way many of these Japanese adventure games seem to work. Trying to think logically will only get you stuck. I would recommend keeping a walkthrough handy if you play this, because the game rarely gives you any hints as to what to do. But complaints aside, this is maybe one of the only Japanese adventure games from the Famicom to get a US release, and it's Hudson's first foray into adventure games, or console adventure games, and thus it is a unique and important game. Well, here's another odd one, Shogun from Hecht, or Hector, or Playing Interface Hecht, as they describe themselves on the screen. That just rolls right off the tongue. Only time we've seen their name before was in a game called Saint Seiya. They were one of the co-developers. This is the first Hecht published game. You might notice the title screen credit to Nippon Dexter and Virgin Interactive. Now, it doesn't mention his name anywhere here, but this was based on James Clavell's 1975 novel, Shogun. The guy who writes those huge historical novels about Asia. It was made into a TV miniseries with Richard Chamberlain and Toshiro Mifune. Now you choose your character from like 30 different characters. It seems like every single character from the novel appears here. And most of them are actually based on historical figures from the Sengoku era. I'm going to choose Toranaga, who is supposed to be based on Tokugawa, who eventually of course did become the Shogun. A number of these guys appeared in Nobunaga's Revenge, as well as all those other games. And this is one really ugly game. I've entered my own castle here. I think I'm going to pick up some items. You can't just run over items. Instead, use the A button to bring up your command menu and select the hand option. This will pick up anything you run over. So about that Virgin Interactive credit, this is oddly enough a port of a Commodore 64 game that came out in 1986. Virgin published this version, though Master Sonic released it for other systems like the CPC or something. Though it's sometimes called an RPG, it's really a side-scrolling adventure game, sort of one of the descendants of Atari's Adventure. Not a bad-looking game, but clearly a lot was changed by Hecht. It's been converted to sort of a typical top-down Zelda RPG-style viewpoint, and the graphics have been completely reworked. The icons for your actions are mostly unchanged, however. The icons allow you to pick up items as we've already seen, as well as drop items, give items to someone else, befriend people, issue orders to your followers, fight people, save the game, and look at the map. The world map is pretty useful. It shows you where all the other characters are, and of course it shows you where you are as well. Now the items you pick up tend to be either weapons, armor, or money, that sort of thing. The object of the game has become Shogun. Supposedly this is done by converting other characters to your cause and fighting certain ones that won't convert. or possibly bribing them. The Commodore 64 game, I guess, is fondly remembered by the sort of folks who like old Commodore games, but it looks sort of boring to me. For our purposes, it's just another of those very rare cases of a Western computer game making its way to the Famicom in highly altered form. We're going to see a battle here in just a moment. It's rather stupid looking if you ask me. I'm not really sure. I don't think you actually do anything in the battle, you just sort of watch them, bounce off each other. So I'd hardly call this a major release. I suppose if you really want to play Shogun, you might be better off playing the, better looking Commodore 64 version instead of this. Don't worry, the end is in sight. But first, here's the third game released on May 27th, Namco Classic. What? It's not called Family Golf? Boy, you really dropped the ball there, Namco. Even the logo looks like it belongs in a family sports game. The NPGA. I guess that's the Namco Pro Golfers Association? Well, Namco Classic is for 1 to 4 players, and you have, a few different game options. One thing you can do is you can either name your own character and select your own clubs, or you can choose a goofy looking character from the game's roster. That's what I'll go ahead and do here. Quite an assortment. There's even the old Asian guy character. You always see him in fighting games as well. I think we'll go with a robot. Robot wearing glasses? And his name is Saipogu? Once you have your character selected, you then have the opportunity to enter in a handicap. So if you're like a real-life golfer, you can sort of tailor the game to you. Now, I'm going to make the same complaint about Namco Classic that I make about every single other golf game we've seen on Chrontendo so far. They are all the same. Same controls, same graphics, same swing the club and hit the ball mechanics. Oh no, wait, I take that back. This one uses a circular power bar, not a straight power bar. Though unlike that Jumbo Ozaki golf game, there is an indicator on the power bar to help you know to press the buttons at the right time. In Jumbo Ozaki's game, you actually had to watch the golf club and do your button presses based on that. But other than that, it's really just like all of Nintendo's golf games. Why doesn't someone make, a miniature golf game, or a golf in space game, or something that's different than what we've already seen a dozen times? I know I say this every single time, but I'm getting tired of all these damn golf games. One thing that's a little bit different here is once you actually, get your ball out onto the green, you can't use a wood club, you have to switch to one of the irons. Most games will let you use whatever club you want all the time. Other than that, it's just the same old story. Hopefully that was worth the extra wait. Next episode, on the other hand, will hopefully be a bit more on time, and we are going to have the second half of the Look at Adventure games, plus a game from Konami, a game from Capcom, and a game from Sunsoft that you all know and love. On the other hand, we're going to have the debut from a little company that we like to call High Tech Expressions. So we'll be looking forward to that. See you next time.